Man, on hot days, these could really wear you out mowing this old grass, especially if you got a lot of it out in these rural areas. It can really be a chore, I'm telling you. But I think the worst thing is weed eating. That's worse than mowing, especially if you got a lot of fence line and trees, obstacles go around. It could really be a chore. But somebody's got to do it, and you can't afford to pay nobody. They'd want a fortune. But it seems like as my lawnmowers get older, I spend more time working on them than I do mowing grass. And you can go down here and find any kind you want. These are the cheaper models. And look how high they are at any box store you go to. And they're nice, but as long as I can find parts for one, I try to keep them running as long as I can, but they get obsolete. You can't get parts for them no more. And these are the cheaper models. The really good brands, really good models, just double the price. But that's the way it is nowadays. And I've been mowing old grass here since I was big enough to walk. Somebody's grass around the neighborhood all the time. This is how you made your money when you was young. But it makes me think, how did our people back in them old days before a combustible engine mowed these grass and cut these fields? Now these mountains and valleys, full of fields, full of yards, little homes. Most of them are little farms nestled at the foot of these mountains throughout Appalachia. Most lived in little bitty old homes like this, and they tried to keep a nice place on these little farms, cutting the yards in these whitewashed buildings behind back, even the little mining camps. People took pride in where they lived and tried to take care of what they had. But it was hard cutting this yard. And even the bigger, nicer homes, well-to-do farms, big fancy houses, they all had to take care of these yards. Weeds would take it over. Even up on these ridges, some people just didn't care about the weeds, or didn't even have no grass at all. But this was the least of their worries, just trying to survive and make a living in these mountains. And up in these hollers and these mountains, the sun never hits. They never had no grass, so they never had to worry about cutting anything like that. And the old homes that's still around, you see the grass cut around them pretty. That's with modern mowers. They try to survive. These homes provide for them, keep them clean. Even in our national parks, they try to keep them clean and cut, but it's all with modern machinery. Even our little museums around Appalachia trying to reserve our history and our heritage. But back then, they didn't have mowers. Livestock usually kept the fields cut down, whether it be sheep or cattle, right up next even to the home where they lived. But the best thing for cutting for the ages that went by was an old goat. As long as you fence them up, they'll eat whatever's in that fenced area. They're the best thing for nature for cutting. Back then, about 500 BC, the cutting tool was developed, used during the Romans, called the scythe, if I can pronounce it right. And a good crew of men could cut a big old field in no time, walk across it, but it was hard work. And for the little short work around the yards and close places, they used things like this, the sickle. Now the bottom one there is an old, what we called up in these mountains, an old reap hook. And I've cut many a grass with that. And they'd even cut their grass with these scythes. Just cut, but that's hard work, hard labor. But that's the way it was. And I reckon the first cutting machine come out about 1830, called the reel mower. And they used these all the way up till today, and they still make these things today and sell them. But if you don't keep them sharp, they're hard work too, pushing them back and forth. But they done the job in little bitty areas, little bitty yards. And they still sell them today too. You can still buy these. And even on these old country clubs and resorts for the well-to-do in the areas, they had big fields for golf course and playing croquet and stuff. And they come up with some weird contraptions. The landscapers trying to cut this grass, you can see here. And some of the first mowing machines look like this, big old bulky things that you couldn't use around the 1900s. Man. But in the 30s, late 30s and early 40s, they started coming out something little motors developed them for home use. And even up to today, they just evolved up to these little push mowers and stuff. But when I done it, growing up, it was picking up pop bottles or mowing somebody's grass every evening, seems like. But that's the way it was if you wanted to make $1 or $2 growing up. And I can remember these old mowers from the early 70s. Most of you probably don't, the newer generation. Remember the old ones that crank up? You slap it down and push a button? Well, that was worse than a rope. They was nice mowers till they got old and out of shape. And you just work yourself to death cranking them things. And then I reckon the rided mower come out in the early 60s. And then they developed up to stuff like this today. That's what we use. Nowadays, for the last 10 years or so, they come up with what they call the zero-turn mower. Hydro powered. And nowadays they got electric mowers. Even robots, just like you do on your carpet, vacuuming. Program them, let them run. And for the big fields nowadays, they use cutting machines like this, or bush hogs out in the field to cultivate with, and they do a great job to keep these fields like this looking nowadays. But back then, these fields didn't look this good, I guarantee you. Didn't have that modern equipment. In them days, this was the tractor. A good set of mules, a good team of horses, they could do some work. But they had a mind of their own. And sometimes they was better than the operators. And this is what they used to cut these fields with. Horse-drawn cutting machine. Look like this. They'd cut these fields, even yards. And they look like this. And they used these up to the combustible motor come out in the tractor. Now when I metal detect in the winter months around these old farms, I find stuff like this just off the fields in the woods, being forgotten about. Old machinery of our fathers and grandfathers, just being lost in time, being forgotten, like the rest of our history. How much labor was spent working with these tools? Makes me sad Them days is long gone. But it's like everything else. It's just being forgotten. And the old rakes, after they cut it, horse-drawn, they would rake these up in little rows and piles. And they didn't have hay balers back in them days. They bale them up in big piles, scrape them up and roll them up in big piles and load them up on wagons and take them to the barn. And I reckon back in the early 1900s, here's the first tail baler that come out. This kind of style. Of course, everything at first works, but it's so inefficient. But as time went on, they made better hay balers. And the first hay balers, they'd have to bring the hay to the baler and let it bale it up. And they'd stack it. But as time went on, they developed pull-along balers, where the tractor pulled them along the piles that they raked up, and they'd spit out these square bales. Just old pictures of how they worked. And they'd stack them up. I done this as a young man when I got older to make some money. Load them up on the trailer, take them to the barn. And it was all done by the old tractor. Here's an old International harvester. Of course, the Ford was real popular too. But these were the tractors of the day that slowly replaced the animals. And I could see old stuff like this around these old farms, an old belt where they'd bring the hay up to the belt, and the belt would take it up to the hay where you'd stack it and store it. Old square bales like this. They still make these, but it's mostly for landscaping around places. But I spent many a labor packing these things. But nowadays they just do the big rolls you see laying out in these fields. It's less labor intensive. The machine does all the work. It rolls them, picks them up, carries them where you want. And the modern cutter looks like this. It cuts these fields for the hay. And they can go through some big fields in a day. And they'll change to the baler. Here's how a round baler works. Goes over your rows you raked up, rolls it up, ties it, spits it out, goes on. Not the square bales anymore. Things have changed. Less labor intensive, but it's the same process. These old people of our country in these rural areas worked hard in these farms. Life wasn't easy, but it was much simpler. Oh, how I miss them old days. Our people, they need to be remembered. I do these little stories of how they lived and how they used to do things. So I hope you enjoyed. God bless every one of you. Take care out there, and I'll see you next time.